Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming tonight, and I hope you enjoy this first, it's not a live podcast, it's first podcast of Harmonious World recorded live in front of an audience. That's you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to be talking to Rob Luft, but he's going to play a little bit first so you've got some idea of his style of music. Off you go. That was lovely.
Jolly good.
Excellent. So Rob and I go back 4 years. So Rob was my 7th guest when I started Harmonious World in 2020. And he came on my podcast, and it was Love is the Dancer?
Life is the Dancer.
Life is the Dancer. That was your second album.
Difficult second album.
Yeah, but I think you found your stride.
Yes, it was unfortunately released in the middle of a global pandemic. In hindsight, well, hindsight is a fine thing. Perhaps either I could have released it after the global pandemic, or the global pandemic could have released itself after the album released. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah. And we've met up at various other things because Rob's been to Hitchin to Club 85 to jazz up a few times, especially with your someone I always think of as your brother in arms, Corey Dick,
yes,
the drummer,
my shipmate.
Who is quite extraordinary.
Yeah,
and a basket case he does this thing where he picks up a basket of percussion instruments, and you think he's going to do that thing where you pick something up. He doesn't. He plays the basket, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
And I think you both have that. Let's see what this sounds like. Mentality.
Yeah, Corey's my ultimate sort of inspiration, really, because he's a jazz drummer, but he comes from Glasgow and has a very strong connection to Scottish folk music and Irish folk music, folk music of the British Isles, really. So the way he mixes that with his own jazz music and his own compositions and his own approach to playing and improvising, it's really nice. It's kind of one of those things that British folk music, it isn't seen as very cool by most people. It's all sort of put a fishy on a dishy, isn't it, really, a lot of it. So I think the way Corey's incorporated that sound into jazz and still made it quite modern and fresh, that's very much that's something for me to look up to always.
Absolutely. So for the benefit of the audience who may not have heard our first podcast interview, tell us a little bit about how you came to be here and how you discovered that you could play the guitar like that.
Well, I guess, as we mentioned before, we're both alumni of the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, which is known as NYJO, and they rehearsed every Saturday in Marylebone near the Edgware Road, and in this theatre, and you could just go along. It was very open and inclusive in the sense that there wasn't a sort of exam or an audition to pass. You didn't have to. It wasn't like that movie Whiplash, where the drummer gets sort of beaten into submission. It was just like, if you've got a guitar or a saxophone or a pair of drumsticks, come along every Saturday morning. And they had a junior band and a senior band, and at that time the senior band was going around the UK playing 150 gigs a year, and you'd get paid for it. So of course that was an inspiration also, because I realised at the tender age of 14 that if I got really good at this thing, I could jump on a bus in North London a few times a week, go all around the country playing in sort of corn exchanges and various theatres. I would get paid for my troubles, and I got to miss like GCSE maths and stuff at the same time. So I remember on the day of my GCSE maths exam, I had to sit it early in order to get to Ronnie Scott's on time to play with NYJO. So that's a good memory, So it was definitely worth learning to play this in order to do all of those things.
But how did you get to that point where you had a guitar?
My stepfather's a guitarist in a sort of failed rock and roll covers band, and I grew up with him, and I believe he's actually played at Club 85 a few times as well with his rock and roll covers band. That kind of figures for the general Club 85. Apart from when it's jazz up, it also has rock and roll covers band.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so he's probably, I think, played there.
Right.
And I grew up in Bromley in southeast London, and he, it's that old case of nature or nurture. I was just in the house and he gave me a guitar when I was about 6 years old, and looked up to him a lot. And he's a good friend of Django Bates, and they went to secondary school together. And Django, and who else was there? That crew: Steve Buckley, Chris Batchelor, the whole Loose Tubes, 1980s Loose Tubes crowd, Steve Berry, Julian Arguelles, that big band.
Arguelles? No, that was the. So we've got these mutual friends, lots of mutual friends. In fact, I was in Loose Tubes for a little while.
Okay, so there we are.
So but Julian Arguelles had a brother called Steve Arguelles, and they weren't called Arguelles when I knew them, and we can't remember what their surname is. So perhaps if someone who's listening to this podcast remembers, you've remembered.
I've not remembered.
No, you haven't. So yes,
we'll check the comments.
Absolutely. But I've also just realised when you were talking about that, that your dad is like my generation. So
very possibly, yes.
So the people that he was, and that's scary, but that's
possibly...
okay. No, don't. But we also just had a conversation at the start of this when we were talking about the fact that Rob is currently playing with John Sermon, who is the country's finest baritone sax player. I defer to him. Absolutely, absolutely. And he is exactly 50 years older than Rob, so he's 20 years older than me, so that's okay.
There we go. So, that is, I think jazz is based on these intergenerational connections, without which the music wouldn't exist. People like Miles Davis and John Coltrane were always playing in bands and hanging around with older musicians. That sort of passing of the baton, that's kind of how this music works. We don't have the blessing of a lot of classical musicians who get to play for, I don't know, Prince William's wedding or whatever it is. Jazz exists in dimly lit, underground, slightly damp clubs with various rodents running around amongst you. But we must embrace these intergenerational connections, because that's how the music keeps going.
Absolutely. And when I started this podcast, the idea was to try and promote people like you who were releasing music out into the world. And people, how did you find out about it? Because there was no touring, there was no appearing on television, there was none of that, nothing.
Yeah.
And so I started it as a lockdown project, and haven't really stopped, which is
fantastic.
Quite,
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I want to be promoting these kind of things. So
we rely upon, I think when I started playing with Nigel, there was daily reviews in The Guardian for jazz, there was daily reviews in the Financial Times for jazz, there was daily reviews, and people were reading the newspapers, the broadsheets still, but even now, 15 years later, there's like one review a month for jazz in The Guardian, and the Financial Times is all but stopped, or whatever, these things that used to be sort of beacons for communicating about new releases, they've all disappeared. So many thanks to Hilary and
my listeners.
Yes, God bless.
Yeah. But it's interesting because there's still a lot of music coming out, and it's because you can't stop, can you? If that's what you do, that's what you do.
Yeah, I guess, and also, I mean, why are people releasing so much music? I actually don't know the answer to that. I mean, people should release a bit less, maybe.
I don't know. Some of it's really good.
Yeah, there's lots of people, isn't there, as well in this world? There's 8 billion people now. So I guess, however many, I don't know, divide that by whatever to get the number of jazz musicians. It's going up. The number of jazz musicians is going up. But the number of reviews in the broadsheets is going down.
Yeah,
so,
well, absolutely.
Yes.
So one of the albums that I reviewed this week is by an artist called Vidya.
Yes.
That you're on.
Yes.
And in fact, the album is called Vidya featuring Rob Luft.
Oh my God.
Because he's reached that stage.
I'm infamous.
You are, absolutely.
Infamous.
But tell me who the other guys are in that band.
They're all Swedes. They're all Swedish, and it's Jon Felt on drums, who's a great drummer, and Magnus Bergström on bass. They're from Gothenburg and Stockholm respectively, and we did 3 gigs in Sweden last month in the midsummer bit. So I got to see Sweden in its full sort of pagan druid glory, with wicker men all around, and 24-hour celebrations as the sun didn't set. I remember we played at the National Jazz Club there, Ronnie Scott's in Stockholm, and I got off stage at 11 p.m. Went out to have a falafel at midnight. It was bright sunshine. It was sort of, the sun was still in the sky, beautiful blue light, and then we came back and there was a late night jam session. I played a really drunken version of My Funny Valentine and then went back out again to go to my hotel room at 2 a.m. and it was getting light again. So that was my druid moment, jazz druid moment for the summer.
But that's a nice album, the Vidya album. It's kind of spiritual and what my daughter calls woo-woo.
Yes.
But it's inspired by a Rumi poet.
It's by Vidya, who's a poet. She's a sort of singer-songwriter, and I think she's very talented, and she has a crazy story where her Indian mother, gave her to an orphanage at the age, at birth, and she was moved to Sweden by some world program, some European program, and she spent the last 30 years trying to track down who her real mother was, and then she tracked down her real mother, and like a week later, her mother was a Himalayan sort of, not a Sherpa, but these people that live in northern India, and a week later her mother actually fell off one of the Himalayan mountains and passed away, and she'd been searching for her for 30 years. So this album is all about the sort of meditation and reflection of such a crazy... Yeah,
because then her Swedish adoptive mother died as well.
Also died like the same period.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. So this album is a real...
It's a reflection of that, and it's beautiful. And she's, not really a straight-ahead jazz singer. She's not a sort of Leanne Carroll type, but she has her own take. It's maybe more in the sort of Joni Mitchell world, really, isn't it? Singer-songwriter. It's really beautiful. And yeah, she's a trip. Being around her is, I don't know how someone who doesn't drink alcohol can be so wild. Still trying to work that out. Anyway, yeah.
But you also work a lot with Elina
Duni. My partner is a great singer from Albania. So we're going to play on Thursday in Kosovo, which is not the world's capital for jazz music, as you can probably imagine. But does have a few really nice summer festivals, great weather, and we're going to play in Kosovo, and then we're off to play in Munich later this month, and in Austria, and in Albania as well, Italy. Did I say that already?
Yeah.
And yes, she's good because she's in that part of the world. She's a bit of a pop star. She's like the Jamie Cullum of the Balkans. So wherever I go with her, we get off the aeroplane and it's straight into the Mercedes, and the sort of the treatment is more than the meal deal that I got at Berkhamsted Jazz Club on Saturday night, with my own quartet. So yeah. I'm very lucky to play with Alina. It makes me feel like I belong in this world and not like I'm an unwanted entity in my weird puddle. So yeah.
But you're a highly sought after guitarist internationally, aren't you?
Yeah, I play about half of my gigs outside of the UK.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Probably 50-50 at this point.
Yeah. And I'm sure those of you who are guitarists, there are a couple in the room, will have been looking at the array of pedals. I mean, when did you start, and have you finished developing your? Because you dip in and out of them, don't you? And
yeah, don't use them all the time.
No.
Especially on a Berkhamsted Jazz Club, where the audience were sort of quite scared. They I think last week they had a jug band, with banjos and stuff, and they see all this, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be a Pink Floyd tribute act or something." But they get quite pleasantly surprised when we play some music by Duke Ellington and Thelonious Monk. But I love to incorporate it because it gives you this wonderful spectral and atmospheric possibility that maybe the unamplified or the acoustic jazz guitar does not have. So it makes my friend, my old teacher and friend, John Paracelli, who always used to say that playing a guitar without a pedal is like flying a plane but never leaving the runway. So I feel like these talent boosters give me the chance to get into the sky a bit, That's really interesting. I didn't know that John Paracelli was your teacher, because he's my generation, and he was one of those guys who was doing that kind of stuff, and I had no idea what he was doing. He'd be sort of at the side of the stage, just kind of noodling like just crazy stuff. He's great.
Yeah.
He's great,
he really
and he's one of the reasons I go playing abroad a lot, and when Loose Tubes reformed, the 80s big band reformed in 2015, I would have been 21, and they were all like in their mid-50s at that time, and I guess John is the regular guitarist on Strictly Come Dancing. This is going to get better, this story, I promise. John, as part of his contract with Strictly, you have to be on screen. The band is on screen for Strictly Come Dancing, so you have signed this contract where you have to be on every single show, and it's a live band with the dancing, And Loose Tubes reformed for a 6-night run at Ronnie Scott's club, and I was 21 and had been having lessons with John for a couple of years when I was at the Royal Academy of Music in London, and John said to me, "I've recommended you to Django Bates to dep for me. You will be the youngest by at least 30 years, but at the time I was sporting a very large beard, so it kind of made up for it as part of one of my many facial hair and head hair styles that Mr. John Morrow is currently making apparently a compendium of." Oh, you haven't got a beard yet? Okay, well you have to find a picture of me with Loose Tubes, age 21, slotting into the band. Anyway, so John got me on the Loose Tubes gig, and then after that I went on tour with Django Bates when Django Bates did this Sgt. Pepper.
Oh, yeah, that's an amazing album.
So I didn't play on the album, but I did the release tour, which is a big band reimagination of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with a jazz big band, and we went all over Scandinavia in 2016, and that was kind of my window into international touring. And Django was just great. I mean, he got me singing various backing vocals, and I got to play one of those weird sitar guitars that George Harrison used to play to get that Ravi Shankar-esque tone, and it was just an amazing experience to just play a jazz version of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean, that's kind of a dream gig for a guitarist, a jazz guitarist.
Yeah.
So yeah, I owe John a lot, and I guess that's how a lot of these things work, isn't it? Word of mouth in the jazz world, and the support from the older generations. And that's the rest is history.
Yeah, and actually probably better to do the Ronnie Scott's with loose tubes, because loose tubes are bonkers, aren't they? I mean,
Yes.
they're just insane.
Yeah.
The music. In fact, I can't remember when I did it whether we actually had music. I think there were parts,
yes.
But it was like a lot of it was kind of right now. There's just a gap. Well, I remember we did some European festivals and we just walked around playing. So obviously you couldn't have music with you.
Yeah.
No idea what I was playing. No idea at all.
Well, I mean, Django Bates, I remember, had a keyboard which had instead of the note being a piano sound, was the sound of a sheep, and he had tuned his piano so it was different. Every note was the sound of a sheep. That resulted in some extremely bizarre musical interactions between like the trombones and Django Bates playing a piano solo with the sound of every note as a sheep baaing.
Yeah.
So that was one experience. Now, when I first got on stage at Ronnie's, Ashley Slater, the compere, said, "Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, on the way to Ronnie Scott's club tonight, John Paracelli was tragically killed in a car crash." But we're delighted that as he was, we've recovered his guitar from the boot. And this chap was walking past Ronnie Scott's, and we said, "We've got this guitar and we need someone to play it tonight." And that's Rob Luft. And that was my introduction to the world of loose tubes. Completely un-PC and in the most wonderful sort of Monty Python-esque way. But yeah, so these are the things that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, would you like to play another piece for us?
Perhaps.
And then I think we'll have a little brief break so that people can get another drink, and then we'll do a bit more of a chat.
The more you drink, the better I sound. Right. I will. That first piece was actually called Daylight Saving Time, and it's from my recent album Dahab Days. And the next track I will play is also from Dahab Days, but it's not by me, it's by Duke Ellington, and the piece is called African Flower. Here we go. Let me just make sure that's working. Yeah, that's working. Here we go.
So a couple of people have asked me about the podcast, and so I thought I'd do a little bit of an explanation about what Harmonious World is all about. And on your table you will see there are some bookmarks, and it would be lovely if you could take one. I have a new hashtag which is Share Harmony, and so on social media I'm using that all the time, and I'd love it if more people did, because what the podcast is about. When I was thinking, because I don't, some of you may know that I've done some radio work, and during lockdown I was like, well, I want to do something like that but not radio, so let's start a podcast. And this amazing woman in America, Amanda Bloom, hi Amanda, if you're listening, you probably are. She's a PR girl, and I said to her, I'd really like to do a podcast, but I don't know where to start. And she said, right, I'll tell you where to start. You buy this microphone, you go on this website, and this is the platform that you use, and this is what you do. So I went, sounds simple, so I did it. And she got me my first few guests, and then I think you came to me through Rupert. We were talking about Rupert Burley, and that was a couple of months in. And when I was thinking about doing this, I looked around for what I would call it. And I found this quote from Quincy Jones. And Quincy Jones is my absolute hero, because he did all the things that we've been talking about bringing musicians together, and has an incredible span. Obviously did all the stuff with Michael Jackson, but Frank Sinatra and big bands and loads of stuff. Anyway, this quote from him, and he's an absolute genius, by the way. He's a polyglot, so he speaks, I think, 8 languages.
Only
and
8?
And I don't even know some of them, but he's a really fascinating guy. He's the guy who discovered Jacob Collier. If those of you that know anything about music, Jacob Collier is this, scary genius, does loads of stuff. Anyway, quote from Quincy Jones was, imagine what a harmonious world it would be if every one of us shared a little of what we're good at. And I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to get people to share what they're good at, which is why, talking to people like Rob, it's like, well, how do you get that sound? How do you do all that? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So if you haven't listened, and I know some of you have listened to some of the podcasts, please do, because that's part of what I'm getting to is, I've interviewed some amazing people. Those of you that know anything about music, I've interviewed Maria Schneider. I mean, I would never have got a chance to do that before lockdown, because she was just busy jetting around the world. She is one of the most prolific big band arrangers in the world. Incredible woman. I've interviewed Christian McBride, China Moses, Rob Luft, who you may have heard of.
Chancer.
I know. So some really amazing people. So do check it out, and by all means take 1 or 2 of the bookmarks. And one of the questions during the interval, and by the way, do think about some questions, because there will be a moment at the end where you can ask Rob a question. You could ask me a question if you like, but probably won't be able to answer it. But one question was about his kit, about all of these pedals. And I apologise to those of you on just listening on the podcast, and you'll have to look on the social media, because there will be a photograph of all the pedals. And I'd like Rob to explain some of this kit before you play another piece for us.
I'll do that quickly so any non-guitarists don't get terribly bored. I feel like this is one of those isolating topics, having had many non-guitar playing partners, girlfriends over the years. The minute the pedals get mentioned, they run away. Anyway, I'll do a quick little. The most typical one I use is a delay pedal to make the guitar sound like, I don't know if you remember that Brian Eno series of albums, I think Music for Airports. A lot of that was using delay and reverse, and so whatever I would play, whatever he would play on his piano or whatever he was working with, synthesizer, it would get played backwards. So for example, if I go like, let's say like this, play a phrase like that, I'm going to do it now with the reverse on. So it plays it backwards. And you can hear that even clearer here actually if I go. So it's playing it backwards. And now what I would often do is have that on an infinite setting, so literally it doesn't stop. So I'll play something in. Here it comes. So little things like that create a kind of carpet, especially when I'm playing with a lot of bands which after the I'll leave that, I'll come back to that. After the jazz apocalypse of 2020, which was of course the coronavirus, after that a lot of festivals and promoters were asking for bands with less musicians in order to cut the costs after various taking a big hit in the COVID times. So a lot of bands I play in don't have a bass player, or they don't have a drummer, or they're musicians who play more than one instrument at the same time, or bit of piano, bit of drums, strange combination. So my party trick is that I can create this carpet of sound, which is still going on here, and that creates a sort of bed upon which the rest of the music can be built. So if I'm doing this, as I'll go back to that. There it is. And I can modulate the sound. And then I might use a device to loop that. So then it's coming out of a different place. It's coming from here. And then I might, because of the aforementioned jazz apocalypse, I might need to play the bass over the top of that, which would drummer to play. And then I might be required, while that's still looping, I might be required to play like a solo over the top of that, but for it to sound like, let's say, a flute. So then I come in with a sort of etc. So a lot of it is about hearing other instrumental sounds and realizing them. And whilst I'm not like Jacob Collier, who I went to I did my jazz degree in the same year as Jacob Collier, and he's a really good friend of mine. I don't have the ability that he has to play 7 instruments and then have the Massachusetts Institute of Technology create holograms of him on stage. So he literally plays the instrument and they make a sort of artificial hologram of him playing the double bass, and he runs to the piano, plays a bit of piano, and the hologram stays there. I'm pretty high tech, but I'm not that high tech. I'm still basically an analog man in a digital world. So that's the crux of it, is impersonating other instruments and helping the music to ultimately to still sound like music and not like computer music. It's human music, Yeah. Does that explain something?
Yeah, it absolutely did. And I think that's really interesting because it is absolutely still music. And one of the things that I did when I do get very organised, I love a spreadsheet, and I love my folders being all organised on my computer. So when I started my podcast, the first thing I did was I had a Harmonious World podcast, and I had a jazz downloads podcast so that I could feed in all of the stuff, because of course people weren't sending me CDs, they were sending me downloads links, and so and then I had a classical downloads, and that lasted about a month, and then I went, I don't know, I can't put people in boxes, because actually there are elements of the improvised and the written in almost every genre, and I often talk to classical musicians. I talk to a flautist who I'm going to interview properly. I interviewed another friend of mine at Abbey Road in February, and he was doing a flute concerto, and there was a cadenza, and although it was written, he kind of went to the composer. They're sitting in Abbey Road, and I'm in the control room trying to be very, very quiet and not say, can't hear the bassoon very, and the flautist went, I really like that cadenza, and I really like what you've done with it, Michael, and it's really nice, but could I try a different one? And so he did a different one, which was incredible. He's got this gold flute. It's like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And it just sounded amazing. And I think that's one of the things that I like about contemporary music, is it's difficult to categorise. You were talking about Corrie and, that Scottish folk influence. Fergus McCready, he's another one. By the way, is he Tom McCready's brother?
No,
they're not related.
They're not related, and Tom McCready is very sad. Tom McCready, whose name is actually Tom McCready, he's from Wakefield, and he's terribly sad about the emergence of the upcoming young Scottish jazz piano player Fergus McCready, because it now means that all jazz promoters call Tom McCready Tom McCready.
Yeah, well, as I just did.
But that's that's part of an in-joke where my bunch of merry men, including Corrie Dick, all now call Tom McCready McCready. So if you could just perpetuate that and keep calling Tom McCready McCready, I'd really deeply appreciate that. Yes,
absolutely. But yes. But he's so Fergus McCready does the same thing with folk music from Scotland, and he appears to do a lot of hiking around the Highlands and then going back and writing this stunning music.
He lives a life of leisure, these London jazz musicians like myself who are trying to do 3 gigs a day 7 days a week, travelling all around the world, Albania one day, USA the next day, and then Berkhamsted the next day. Fergus spends half of his time up the Munros of the Scottish Highlands.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's, the life of Riley.
Absolutely. So has anybody got a question that they'd like to ask Rob? Has somebody, got a burning question that's occurred to them while we've been talking? If not, we'll carry on. But
I have a question. It's something I always like to ask musicians. What are you listening to at the moment?
Great question. Well, until this afternoon, the sun's been shining, so it's basically been the Beach Boys album Pet Sounds for the last month. I just think it's one of the finest pop albums. Is it pop? I guess it is really sort of 60s pop, isn't it? And it's full of so much good arrangements. And there's a documentary about the making of it with Brian Wilson, and there's all these session musicians on who are playing the guitars and bass and drums on that album. And Brian Wilson's out the front in this scene that I'll never forget on that, where Brian Wilson's sitting on the front of a car, on the bonnet of a car, smoking a joint, and in the middle of the session, and one of the session musicians comes out, these hired, guns for hire guitar players from the 60s, and says, we do 4 sessions a day, but this Pet Sounds malarkey, this is something a bit special. And Brian Wilson's just basking in the sunlight on the bonnet of his Ford, whatever it was, smoking, and with this huge beard, wearing pajamas, and it's just astonishing. The documentary about the making of Pet Sounds, and I love the tunes on it. God Only Knows, the compositions like that. They're just so beautiful. And I guess Sgt. Pepper's falls in the same category of sort of concept album. Sort of the British equivalent of Pet Sounds for me is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So I listen a lot to music from that time, really, and obviously a lot of jazz. And what else? I don't know. I've been every Sunday in Deptford, near Greenwich. There's a free entry live music night, Congolese musicians playing Congolese rumba, and it's possibly the loudest gig I have ever been to, and will be responsible for my chronic tinnitus, age 31. But it's so worth it, because these guys from the Congo who have moved to London in the last 20 years due to the various unrests that have been going on in that part of the world, they work on British railways, in the daytime, and then they take off their high-vis and come and play like guitars and saxophones and drums and sing in this Cameroonian bar in Deptford called Maestro Bar, and it's all green, and you go in and everyone's speaking French, so I've really got my French together just going there. And also they serve this foreign extra Guinness, which is 8.5%, and that helps me to speak French. So it's the foreign extra version of Guinness, which after about 3 of them and some really loud Congolese music, that's just brilliant. And I again, it's inspired a lot of what I do with my guitar playing is really inspired by that West African, that sort of sound. How would I explain it? So that, going to that, sort of, music is to be listened to live and inspire. That's how musicians forget that music should be primarily a live listening experience. How we, as a community, we used to listen to, before recordings, we used to listen to live music, and it hits you in the face so directly. So I'm trying to reconnect with that, despite, as I say, doing 3 gigs a day around London and various other places. So yeah, that's worth checking out. Maestro Bar in Deptford. Yeah. Fantastic.
And I think if you ever wanted to have a sort of concept of what jazz guitar is about, I think that's, or what even jazz is about, it's about that taking an influence from somewhere, taking a sound or a melody or something, and making it your own and playing with it. And I think that's one of the things that I love most about jazz.
Yeah, it's magpie music. It really is magpie music. You just take a little bit of shiny music that you really love or adore and mix it with something else and bring it back to your nest and then create something totally new from it. That's what I really like about this music, whereas pop music and classical music and folk music can be slightly more regimented. I love folk music, I love pop music, I love classical music, but I guess they're more regimented. You have to play, this is the song and we're going to play it the same way every time, whereas I guess jazz has that as Spike Milligan famously said, jazz musicians don't play the same thing once. So that's great.
Yeah. I love a Spike Milligan quote. He has some great ones, some brilliant ones. So last time I interviewed Alina, it was about A Time to Remember, which has come out. And obviously you've got Dahab Days, which came out last year as well. Yeah. So what's next?
What's next? Good question. Well, I'm on the road with John Sermon at the moment, and that's been amazing. We were in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago, and apart from lugging his baritone saxophone around various European airports, it's amazing. Yeah. Played at Ronnie Scott's Club about 3 weeks ago. We Manchester Jazz Festival. We're in Finland. We're going to play in Austria this month with John, in Berlin next month. I felt like last year I sowed a lot of musical seeds, and this year I'm picking the fruits of those seeds, with various recordings that came out at the back end of last year. And I wrote this huge piece for the BBC Concert Orchestra, which John took some photos of. I wrote a piece for guitar, bass, drums, plus a 72-piece symphony orchestra, and that was a rather large undertaking.
Yeah.
It basically aged me quite badly, and I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, looking in the mirror at this sort of terribly stressed out looking back at me, and singing like what the oboe part would play in bar 89 of the second movement of my 72-piece symphonic work that was premiered at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in the London Jazz Festival last year. So that was another seed sown, and I now feel like I have to, after doing that, just catch my breath a little bit. But despite that, I'm still doing about 180 gigs this year, in about 28 different countries. So I'm not really stopping much, but it's very much a year of touring. I hope to record again for ECM, the German label who've released John Sermon's album and two with Alina. I've reduced some of those pieces down from that orchestral work to just solo guitar, which, believe it or not, is possible to reduce a 75-piece symphonic work down to just 6 strings. So I mean, if maybe you want to hear that.
That would be nice. Yeah.
That's the first movement of the work, which was called From Silence Music is Born, and the first movement of this was called As Time Passes, and I wrote it for a Norwegian bass player, Arold Anderson, and the album came out with him about a month ago. And next year we'll be touring with Arold to talk about a gig at Ronnie Scott's Club. And anyway, I'll just play a little bit of this so you hear it. This you can hear this online on the BBC Sounds or iPlayer or whatever it's called. The full work is still up there, but this is just the guitar-only version, as it were.
That was lovely. That was fabulous. Tell me what this orange one is.
This one is, this orange one is a whammy, which makes the sound either go up an octave or makes it go down a fifth. I love this guitarist from America who was part of that Beach Boys session group. He was Glenn Campbell, of course, you know, used to play the baritone guitar, which has this meaty sound that normal guitars don't have, and it's not quite like a bass. A bass is really low, that's like... But the baritone guitar that Glenn Campbell used to play has this really nice touch to it. And then, yeah, this is a sort of all-purpose talent booster, can do anything. I was very happy last year, around this time of year, I was playing in a provincial jazz club in somewhere near Cardiff, and the promoter came in and saw this and he went, "You've got a bloody LGBTQI plus pedal board." I just thought that was the most Welsh intro to meeting him. "You've got a bloody because it really is the rainbow of pedals there. So that was a classic moment for British jazz.
Absolutely. British jazz is in a weird place at the moment, I think.
Yes.
It's you were talking about the, Berkhamsted Jazz Festival, and it's all kind of, men of a certain age, and
well, it's just it's as Frank Zappa said about jazz in general. You could apply it to British jazz. British jazz isn't dead; it just smells funny. So I think yes, what to do? We survive on the support of clubs around the country. I did this tour with Dave O'Higgins, which just concluded on Saturday. It was a 45-date tour of England and Wales, and I think we played in almost every jazz club on this island. And it was a real insight into the various working men's clubs of Sheffield and the golf clubs of Bromley, and it was just it was glamorous in its own way, filling up our flasks from the tap in the toilet, men's toilets, in order to get a bottle of water because the promoter had forgotten to bring them. It's very keeps you very down to earth. These are humbling experiences, the British jazz scene. So. Yeah. And it's very well supported. Musicians from all over the world come to Britain to play because there is an audience for this music in this country, which in many countries there is not that groundswell of grassroots support for this music. So I know that I make sarcastic comments about it, but it is a beautiful thing, and it's supported by a community of really enthusiastic audiences, and as I say, people coming from all over the world. There must be something going for us in this musical nation. So we love you madly.
Yeah. So have you played at Jazz Café Posk?
I have played many times at Jazz Café Posk.
It's a great little place, isn't it?
That's amazing.
If you get a chance to go there, it's sort of Hammersmith way, and it's in the basement of this place that was built. I thought it was a conversion, but it wasn't. It was built to be a cultural centre for Polish refugees and things immediately after the Second World War, and or maybe even before that. Anyway,
that sounds
20th
right.
century, yeah. And but this jazz club, and it's only just sort of recently sort of started up properly. There's a great guy called Tomaz who is on the door, and it's absolutely amazing. We saw Darius Brubeck there with Dave O'Higgins. And that was incredible, and it's a great little club.
It's a great club. I'm going to play there this year in the London Jazz Festival, not with a 72-piece symphony orchestra, mind you. With my quartet in this year's London Jazz Festival. We'll play at the Jazz Café Posk, and Tomasz has been so supportive over the years.
Yeah.
He's I always mispronounce this word. He's indefatigable.
Yes.
He never tires of promoting jazz. So there's another example that you go down these stairs into this what can only be described as a sort of communist style 70s Polish basement club, and all of a sudden a jazz band strikes up and starts playing, and it all makes sense. Especially last year we did a jazz festival gig there playing the music of Tomasz Stanko, who was the sort of Poland's answer to Miles Davis, and achieved a bit of fame because he wrote the music for an American series called Homeland, which was on HBO or something, 20 years ago. And Tomasz Stanko wrote the music for it and played trumpet on it. Unfortunately, his teeth had all fallen out. So Homeland, the directors of Homeland, decided to pay him in advance so he could get his teeth replaced. And then he started playing the trumpet again. It was a wonderfully sort of East European story of music and madness all converging.
Absolutely.
And I played his music at the Jazz Café Post, the Polish Jazz Café, last year, and the Polish TV came, the Polish national TV came to film it, and I found myself being translated into Polish. Every announcement that I was making on the microphone was being translated into Polish for all these Polish audience that had come. It's quite an amazing space, really. Yeah,
it really is. It really is. There are so many great jazz clubs, and it's good to know that you and Dave have been going around playing them.
We love it. We live for it. Live for it. The less glamorous, the better. Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. Unless anyone has got any other questions they want to ask, I'm done. We've answered everything. But thank you so much.
A pleasure.
It's been really good to chat with you, Rob.
Pleasure. Shall I close out with a little snippet?
I think that'd be nice. Yeah.
It's only, what is it? It's only like 186 shopping days left till Christmas, so I've got a few CDs in my gig bag.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
come and say hello.
He'll even sign them.
I'll sign them, which will devalue them. This is a piece by Bill Frisell, great inspiration of mine, American guitarist, from his debut album, which was released on ECM Records in 1984, and the piece is called Throughout. And you're going to notice that on a musical level, it's a very simple, it's like a round, it's like a canon, it just goes round and round, it's like a hymn, has a very hymn-like quality to it. So here we go, Throughout, it's called Throughout.
Well, thank you. A big thank you to Rob for a fantastic conversation and playing so much. That's just such a pleasure. Thank you to the team at the Market Theatre for making it happen. Thank you to Julian for filming it, and you'll be able to watch this on YouTube eventually in a little while. Thank you especially to you for coming and being my first live audience for an episode of Harmonious World. This was a sort of scary prospect, but something I've wanted to do, and it's just worked perfectly for me in terms of combining that music, helping Rob share what he's good at, which is what Harmonious World is all about. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.